The traditional Day of the Sun parade with an emphasis on new missiles and missile launchers.
We're going to have an awful lot of American intelligence analysts looking over parade footage for a very long time to try to determine what may or may not be the status of these missile programs in North Korea.
With a U.S. naval carrier group now near the Korean peninsula, China warns of storm clouds gathering and urges Washington and Pyongyang to avoid a dangerous miscalculation.
I think we've got to be careful here. This is, we shouldn't engage in any precipitous action. There's a reason no U.S. president in recent history has pulled the trigger on North Korea.
All this as the new president shows no hesitation in using American military power, getting the world's attention first with missile strikes in Syria, and then the first-time use of a massive bomb against ISIS, an ISIS camp in Afghanistan.
If you look at what's happened over the last 8 weeks and compare that really to what's happened over the last 8 years, you'll see there's a tremendous difference, So we have incredible leaders in the military and we have incredible military, and we are very proud of them. And this was another very, very successful mission.
With us this Sunday to share their reporting and their insights, Julie Pace of the Associated Press, CNN's Manu Raju, Jonathan Martin of the New York Times, and Abby Phillip of the Washington Post. President Trump is spending the Easter weekend at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida, where officials say he was briefed on the failed North Korean missile launch and will have no further comment. Vice President Mike Pence is on the front lines of this tense standoff, visiting U.S. troops in South Korea this morning.
This is a challenging time all over the world, but especially here in the Asia Pacific. But let me assure you, under President Trump's leadership, our resolve has never been stronger. Our commitment to this historic alliance with the courageous people of South Korea has never been stronger. And with your help and with God's help, freedom will ever prevail on this peninsula.
CNN's Dana Bash is the only network correspondent traveling with the vice president. Joins us live now from Seoul with more on his message to the troops and, Dana, the message to key allies in the Asian Pacific as well.
Well, you just heard a bit of what the vice president said, the only thing he has said since landing here in South Korea. And it's almost as if it's a different administration from what we have seen and heard from his boss, President Trump, in the last week or so. The tough talk and tweets vis-a-vis North Korea, that was not on display at all as the vice president landed here. He also said just vaguely that the provocation that we saw this morning, not even mentioning North Korea by name, is a reminder that the troops, the U.S. troops who are stationed here, are at risk. Now, just by way of background and color, the vice president was briefed on this failed missile test within the hour after we on Air Force Two took off after refueling in Alaska. And a short while later, one of the aides traveling with him, a White House policy advisor, came back and made it clear right away that the administration was going to try to play this one pretty low key, saying, first of all, that this was not a surprise, that it wasn't a matter of if, but rather when the North Koreans would try to put something provocative out there. And obviously, it was this missile test that failed. And the fact that it failed, according to this advisor, after only 4 or 5 seconds in the air was one of the reasons why they weren't going to jump at reacting or maybe overreacting. The other, this advisor noted, is because it wasn't a nuclear test. And the source said that if it had been, the U.S. actions would be quite different. But there's no question that the administration, the vice president and his staff knew very well coming to this peninsula now when the region is very tense, but also given the fact that it is just hours after the North Koreans celebrated their very important day, the Day in the Sun that Will Ripley has been reporting on. They knew that the chances were very, very high that something was going to happen that was going to test the Americans' resolve and how they were going to react.
And as we wait for that reaction, Dana Bash with the vice president in Asia. We'll keep track of that as it plays out. And how the North Korean regime responds to this embarrassing failure is a big question. U.S. and South Korean intelligence agencies believe North Korea was already considering a new nuclear test, even before this missile launch. CNN's Will Ripley live in Pyongyang, where, Will, am I correct, state TV has still made no mention of the failed missile launch?
And they won't, John. North Korea doesn't publicize failures, but if this missile launch had been a success, we probably would see photos and video of the North Korean leader Kim Jong Un presiding over a successful event. I've been in the country a couple of times before, and it's a surreal experience because the rest of the world is talking about this, and pretty much everybody in North Korea is unaware. I did meet with some North Korean officials today who were aware of the reports, but obviously there's no comment expected from the country. But I can tell you the sense I get, there will be more missile launches, and I wouldn't rule out the possibility of this 6th nuclear test, John. The Punggye-ri nuclear test site is primed and ready, according to the United States and South Korean intelligence analysts, both in the government and private sector. And at this point, because there was a failed launch, it may be more motivation for the North Korean leader, Kim Jong Un, to try something more provocative to show strength to the international community after unveiling at the military parade on Saturday all of these new missiles that you saw on display.
Will Ripley for us live in Pyongyang. We'll keep in touch with you as the day progresses as well. So back here in Washington, the question is, what is President Trump's next move after a show of U.S. power did not dissuade North Korea from trying that missile test?
We are sending an armada, very powerful. We have submarines, very powerful, far more powerful than the aircraft carrier, that I can tell you. And we have the best military people on earth. And I will say this, he is doing the wrong thing. He's making a big mistake.
The president says he's making a big mistake. Obviously, the missile launch failed. Everyone waits now to see if they launch again or if they go to the nuclear test. But the president's rhetoric has been pretty out there. Essentially, they don't comment on the specific launches, but the idea being, you keep provoking us, we will feel the pressure, if not the promise, to respond.
And that would be a huge change in U.S. policy. We've seen previous administrations, Democratic and Republican, really focused on diplomatic negotiations, trying to bring China in and have talks with the North. That doesn't seem like that's going to be the Trump administration's policy, but Trump has really put this out there now. He has made clear that he is willing to take action in North Korea. And I think the shift that you saw in Pence's rhetoric, though, when he's standing in front of U.S. troops who are stationed in South Korea, very close to the north, shows, though, that when you're on the ground there, this is a much different situation than when you're talking about this back in Washington. There are Americans and a strong U.S. ally that are right in the danger zone.
Right, and an acting president in South Korea right now, so a dicey political situation. If you've ever been to the DMZ, I've been several times, it is the most surreal place on earth. The Cold War still exists. You see the fencing, you see the mines, you see the North Korean sentries right across. If you go too far out, the weapons come out. You were about to make a point.
Yeah, I was going to say, it shows also the difference between Pence and President Trump. Pence being very careful not to engage North Korea, discuss North Korea. Donald Trump not afraid to go after North Korea and Kim Jong Un. I mean, going after them militarily is a huge risk because South Korea is next door. There are missiles and arms pointed at South Korea from the north. They could stand to lose a lot if they do retaliate, as they are threatening to do if they are provoked. So having a military option on the table, as the president is suggesting, is a huge risk. They may have to go through the diplomatic way, force China to intensify some of those, help with those sanctions. But it is interesting to see how Pence is taking a more diplomatic approach overseas in this sensitive time. Yeah, Trump is all for the sort of big stick part, but he's also walking loudly here. So he's not really a Teddy Roosevelt type. He's doing his own thing here with the presidency. And obviously Pence is much more of a conventional politician. And when you're in South Korea, you speak in a certain language and you don't say certain things. You don't rattle sabers over there. And, it's just a matter of time before the president speaks about this. I was struck last night by the comment from Jim Mattis, the defense secretary, saying the president will have no further comment on this North Korean missile test. Well, okay, good luck with that. Well, but the Secretary of State said that the Secretary of State was in Asia, and then North Korea did do a test, and they said the same thing. We're not going to. They believe that Kim Jong Un wants attention. He wants to be in a running conversation with the president of the United States because he believes that elevates him on the world stage, and they're not going to give him that conversation. It's a key question.
of how long the president can resist, especially when Kim Jong Un says, sorry, Mr. President, send your naval carrier group. I will still, again, it failed, and that's embarrassing to the North Korean regime. It failed, but they still tested against the president's conversations. The Secretary of State, as I mentioned, spoke with the Chinese state counselor, who's essentially China's top diplomat. The administration has been counting, as past administrations have counted, to try to get the Chinese to exercise some leverage. China did take some modest economic sanctions or steps back from North Korea last week. But again, the regime tried this missile launch, so it would tell you, at least in the short term, that hasn't worked.
Well, it hasn't worked for quite some time because there's only so much that China can do to sort of curtail Kim Jong Un, who is a lot more bellicose than people expected, a lot more bellicose than prior North Korean leaders. So you're dealing with someone who's a little bit more erratic than what we're used to on the world stage. And so this is not an easy problem. And I think what's interesting is seeing Trump learn that day by day, that this is not just something that prior American presidents have just not taken the options that were on the table. If there were really good options to deal with North Korea, as Leon Panetta said in your intro, we would have used them by now. The problem is that there are real risks, not just to us, but also to our ally in South Korea. And the president is realizing, after talking with the Chinese and talking with his advisors, that it's not just, there is no magic pill to really get rid of North Korea as a problem on the world.
It's a great point, because the United States could, from those submarines or from that aircraft carrier group, take out missile launchers, perhaps take out a nuclear site. However, the response from North Korea could be just a rain of traditional missiles, just miles to the south, where you have not only thousands of U.S. troops and thousands of South Korean troops, but the millions of people who live in Seoul and in the suburbs around it. That has been the fear for 50-plus years now. But the president's rhetoric has been pretty strong. He was asked the other day, you've launched missile strikes in Syria. You dropped the mother of all bombs. We're going to get to that in a few minutes in Afghanistan, this weapon that had never been used before. Is that a message to Pyongyang?
Hey, does it send a message to North Korea?
I don't know if this sends a message. It doesn't make any difference if it does or not. North Korea is a problem. The problem will be taken care of.
It's the certainty there. And you want a president to voice confidence, but if you talk to Japanese or South Korean diplomats and others, even Australian diplomats, others in the neighborhood, if you will, what they worry about is Kim Jong Un is perhaps the most unpredictable leader on the planet. And now they think this president, the president of the United States, who they're all looking to for leadership, is also unpredictable, and they're not sure what he's going to do.
But it's actually telling that Trump has been told how sensitive this matter is by both his own staff and by other foreign countries, because his reaction there, at least initially, was very un-Trump-like, where he said, it doesn't matter if it's a message or not.
But then he couldn't hold it.
He couldn't hold it together. But the old Trump would have said, you're damn right it sends a message.
Well, and even after the strikes in Syria, I was in Mar-a-Lago when those strikes were called, and in the immediate aftermath, Trump advisors were saying, yes, this does send a message. This, of course, is in the middle of the summit that he's having with the Chinese president, and we know from Trump himself that during the course of those conversations, he learned a bit more about how complicated the North Korea situation is. And when you talk about these other allies in the region, yes, they like the strength from the U.S. Yes, they like the idea that this is a president who is focused on this problem, who believes that this is a problem that the U.S. could solve, but they would like a few more details about how this might go, because the impact of this regionally would really be enormous.
Right, and the president has drawn a line. We have our vice president there, Will Ripley in Pyongyang. We'll keep an eye on that. Ahead, promises kept and promises tossed aside as the 100-day mark approaches. But first, what do those strikes in Syria and Afghanistan tell us about the new president's view on use of force and of America's